Look around for a moment and notice something most people ignore. Nothing in existence is truly still. Every star blazing in the night sky is racing through space at unimaginable speeds. Planets are spinning while orbiting their stars. Galaxies drift across the cosmos like slow, silent storms. Even the ground beneath your feet is moving as the Earth spins and travels through space. And deeper than that, inside every cell of your body, trillions of atoms vibrate and collide in constant motion. The universe has never known true stillness. Motion is its natural state. Movement is its language. Now here is the part that most people never stop to consider. The same hidden laws that guide the motion of planets and stars are shaping your life right now. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. The universe operates through rules so consistent that entire galaxies obey them without question. These laws do not pause. They do not negotiate. They do not care about excuses or intentions. They simply work every second, everywhere. And if everything in the universe is controlled by motion, then your direction, your progress, and even your failures are not random events. They are outcomes shaped by forces, patterns, and momentum. Most people grow up believing their life is a series of unpredictable events. They blame luck, timing, other people, or circumstances, but the deeper truth is far less comfortable. Life follows motion just as strictly as physics does. When movement stops, progress stops. When direction is unclear, energy is wasted. When force is applied consistently, change becomes inevitable. The universe is not chaotic in the way people imagine. It is brutally consistent. This realization can feel unsettling because it means many of the things people complain about are not mysterious problems. They are predictable results. When something sits still long enough, it stays exactly where it is. When something moves with force and direction, it eventually arrives somewhere new. The pattern is simple, but it is also unforgiving. Nature does not make exceptions. Think about the quiet power hidden inside motion itself. A planet continues orbiting its star for billions of years because the forces acting on it never stop. The orbit is not maintained by motivation or sudden bursts of energy. It is maintained by continuous movement. Even the most massive objects in existence remain stable only because motion balances the forces trying to pull them apart. Without that motion, collapse would happen instantly. This truth carries a sharp message that most people avoid confronting. Waiting rarely changes anything. Hoping rarely creates motion. The universe does not respond to hesitation. It responds to force. It responds to direction. It responds to movement. And yet countless people spend years trapped in stillness, expecting life to somehow shift on its own. The reality is much colder than that. The universe rewards motion and punishes stagnation. Not emotionally, not personally, but through simple physical truth. When nothing pushes forward, nothing moves forward. When energy is not applied, systems remain exactly where they are. This applies to stars, planets, machines, and human lives alike. Here is another unsettling thought. Motion does not need to be dramatic to be powerful. A small force applied consistently can eventually move mountains. Tiny gravitational pulls slowly shape entire galaxies. Invisible forces bend the paths of light, traveling across billions of kilometers. The universe proves again and again that persistence matters more than sudden bursts of power. That means change rarely begins with explosive transformation. It begins with motion so small that it almost feels meaningless. A shift in direction, a push forward, a decision to stop remaining still. At first, nothing seems different. The world looks the same. Progress feels invisible. But the laws of motion are already at work beneath the surface, building momentum, slowly bending the trajectory of what comes next. And momentum is dangerous in the most fascinating way. Once movement begins, it becomes easier to keep moving than to stop. Objects in motion resist being slowed down. Systems in motion create energy that fuels further motion. This is why some people seem to accelerate through life while others remain frozen for years. The difference is rarely talent or luck. It is motion versus stillness. The universe does not reward potential. It rewards movement. Potential without motion is like a rocket that never leaves the ground. It may be powerful, impressive, full of promise, but none of it matters until force is applied and direction is chosen. Every day the same invisible laws that guide galaxies are quietly shaping the path ahead. Every decision either adds momentum or strengthens inertia. Every action either pushes forward or reinforces stillness. The universe does not slow down to wait for clarity or comfort. It moves constantly, relentlessly, and it expects everything within it to do the same. The question is no longer whether motion controls the universe. That has already been proven for centuries. The real question is far more personal and far more uncomfortable. In a universe built entirely on movement, what happens to something that refuses to move at all? The universe follows a rule so simple that it almost feels insulting to hear it out loud. Yet it governs everything from falling apples to moving galaxies. Things that are at rest tend to stay at rest. Things in motion tend to stay in motion. This is not philosophy. It is one of the most stubborn truths in physics. And once this rule is understood, something uncomfortable becomes clear. Human lives follow the same pattern. Stillness feeds on itself. Motion feeds on itself. The longer something stays still, the harder it becomes to move it. The longer something moves, the harder it becomes to stop it. This principle is everywhere. A heavy stone sitting on the ground will not suddenly slide across the floor. It requires force, a push, an external change that breaks its stillness. Without that push, it will sit there indefinitely, not for hours or days, but for centuries if nothing disturbs it. Now look closely at how people live. Many wait for motivation before taking action. They wait for confidence before trying something difficult. They wait for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect circumstances. But the law of inertia quietly mocks that strategy, because motivation rarely appears while something is at rest. Energy rarely appears in stillness. Movement creates energy, not the other way around. This is the first harsh realization most people avoid. Waiting for motivation is the fastest way to stay stuck. The universe never designed motion to begin with inspiration. Motion begins with force. Even a small push is enough to break inertia, but without that push, nothing changes. There is a strange psychological trap hidden inside inertia. Stillness feels safe, comfortable, predictable. When nothing moves, nothing threatens stability. That comfort slowly becomes addictive. Days become routines. Routines become years, and without noticing it, life becomes a loop of repetition. The frightening part is that stagnation rarely feels dramatic. It feels normal. Physics explains why. Inertia protects the current state of things. If a system is not moving, every force within it quietly works to keep it that way. Habits reinforce habits. Thoughts reinforce thoughts. Environments reinforce behaviors. The longer the pattern continues, the heavier the system becomes. Just like a massive object that becomes harder to push the longer it sits untouched. This is why the first step forward often feels absurdly difficult. Not because the action itself is impossible, but because it is fighting accumulated inertia. The weight of months or years of stillness pushes back against the first sign of movement. Resistance appears instantly. Doubt appears instantly. Fatigue appears instantly. Most people interpret this resistance as proof they should stop, but in reality, it is simply inertia defending the old state. Once motion begins, something fascinating happens. The same law that once worked against progress suddenly begins working in favor of it. Objects in motion resist being stopped. Momentum builds slowly but relentlessly. A system that has started moving requires less force to continue moving than it did to begin. This is why small actions matter more than dramatic ones. People often imagine that transformation requires massive effort, sudden discipline, or extreme motivation. But physics suggests something different. All that is required is enough force to break inertia. After that moment, movement starts carrying itself forward. There is another brutal truth hidden inside this law. Remaining still is not a neutral choice. It is a decision that strengthens inertia every single day. Every postponed action, every delayed effort, every moment of hesitation quietly adds weight to the system. Over time, that weight becomes enormous. Eventually, the effort required to move forward feels overwhelming, even though the original step might have been simple. This is how people become trapped without realizing it. Not through catastrophic mistakes, but through quiet stillness. Days without motion stack on top of each other until the idea of movement feels exhausting. The world does not lock the door. Inertia simply makes the door heavier and heavier to push open. The universe does not negotiate with this law. It does not pause to make exceptions. The rule applies equally to stars, machines, and human behavior. Stillness strengthens stillness. Motion strengthens motion. Understanding this changes the entire strategy for progress. Instead of waiting for inspiration, movement becomes the priority. Instead of searching for perfect timing, the goal becomes breaking inertia. The size of the action matters far less than the fact that it happens. A tiny push can start the movement of something enormous if it happens at the right moment. A slight shift in direction can eventually change the entire path of an object traveling through space. The first movement is always the hardest, but it is also the most powerful. Because once inertia is broken, the universe begins helping instead of resisting. This is why the most dangerous habit is staying still while believing progress will eventually arrive. The laws of motion do not support that belief. Stillness does not magically transform into movement. It must be disrupted. It must be challenged. It must be pushed. And once that push happens, everything changes. The same force that once kept everything frozen suddenly begins pulling life forward with unstoppable momentum. Movement in the universe is never effortless. Every object that travels through space faces opposition. Forces push against it, slow it down, pull it in different directions. Friction, gravity, pressure, drag. These are not accidents. They are built into the structure of reality itself. Motion is always challenged. Nothing moves forward without meeting resistance. And yet this is the moment where most people give up. The first sign of difficulty appears, and it immediately feels like something is wrong. Energy drops. Doubt grows. The mind begins inventing reasons to stop. But resistance was never a warning sign. It was the price of motion from the very beginning. Look at the universe closely. Planets are constantly fighting the pull of gravity. Stars burn with unimaginable energy just to prevent their own collapse. Galaxies twist and collide under forces so powerful they reshape entire regions of space. Motion only exists because opposing forces are constantly battling each other. Without resistance, nothing would move with stability. Everything would either freeze or collapse instantly. The universe maintains balance through tension. This is the second harsh realization most people avoid. Resistance does not mean the path is wrong. Resistance means force is finally being applied. Think about what happens when something heavy begins to move. At the beginning, friction is strongest. The object resists every push. It feels stuck, almost welded to the ground. But once it starts sliding, the resistance decreases. Motion becomes smoother. Energy flows more efficiently. The system adapts. Human effort behaves in the exact same way. The beginning of any change feels painfully slow. Progress seems invisible. Every action feels heavier than expected. But that heaviness is not failure. It is friction being overcome. It is resistance slowly losing control. Most people never get past this stage because they misinterpret what they feel. The moment effort becomes uncomfortable, they assume something is wrong with the plan, the goal, or themselves. So they retreat back into stillness where everything feels easy again. But easy is not progress. Comfort is often just disguised stagnation. The universe does not move forward through comfort. It moves through force meeting resistance and refusing to stop. Every orbit, every explosion of a star, every shifting galaxy is the result of immense pressure pushing against immense opposition. That same pattern appears everywhere. When muscles grow stronger, it happens because resistance tears them down before rebuilding them. When skills develop, they sharpen through repeated difficulty. When ideas reshape the world, they survive through criticism and pressure. Resistance is not a barrier. It is a filter. It separates what is temporary from what is persistent. Here is another uncomfortable truth. If life feels completely smooth, completely easy, completely free of pressure, there is a strong chance nothing meaningful is happening. Growth creates friction. Progress creates tension. Movement attracts resistance. The universe rewards those who continue moving even when resistance appears. Not because the universe is kind, but because persistence gradually overwhelms opposing forces. Every push changes the balance slightly. Every action shifts momentum. Eventually, resistance weakens. This is where the turning point happens. What once felt impossible suddenly begins to feel manageable. What once felt heavy starts to feel natural. The effort that once drained energy begins to generate it. But reaching that point requires enduring the phase where resistance is strongest. Most people never experience the power of momentum because they stop exactly where friction is highest. They retreat right before motion begins to stabilize. They turn back right before resistance starts losing ground. The universe quietly rewards those who refuse to interpret resistance as failure. Every force pushing forward changes the equation. Pressure builds slowly. Balance shifts gradually. Until eventually the system transforms. Rivers carve through solid rock not because they are powerful in a single moment, but because they apply pressure continuously. Gravity shapes entire galaxies through forces that seem weak but never stop acting. Even light bends under persistent influence. Consistency breaks resistance. And once resistance breaks, motion becomes unstoppable. This is why the presence of resistance should never be mistaken for a dead end. It is often the clearest signal that something real has finally begun. Momentum is one of the most underestimated forces in existence. It hides in plain sight, quietly shaping everything that moves through the universe. A small object drifting slowly through space seems harmless. But give it speed, give it persistence, and suddenly that same object carries enormous power. Motion multiplies itself. Energy builds on top of energy. And once momentum grows strong enough, stopping it becomes incredibly difficult. The universe runs on this principle. Planets do not stay in orbit because someone is constantly pushing them. They stay in motion because momentum keeps carrying them forward. A comet traveling through space does not decide its path every second. Its speed and direction combine into a force that keeps it moving across unimaginable distances. Once something gains momentum, it begins to sustain itself. Human lives follow the same rule, even if it is rarely recognized. At the beginning, effort feels weak. Small actions seem meaningless. One step forward barely changes anything. A single disciplined day feels invisible. The results are so tiny that they almost look like nothing at all. This is where most people lose patience. They expect immediate transformation, immediate progress, immediate reward. When that explosion of change does not happen, they assume the effort is pointless. But momentum does not work that way. Momentum grows quietly. The first push barely moves the system. The second push moves it slightly more. Each additional effort adds a little more speed, a little more direction. For a long time, the change is almost impossible to notice. Then something strange begins to happen. The system that once resisted every movement suddenly begins to carry itself forward. That is the moment momentum takes control. Look closely at any powerful system in the universe, and the same pattern appears. Stars form when clouds of gas collapse slowly under gravity. At first, the motion is weak and scattered. But as particles gather together, their combined force increases. The collapse accelerates, heat builds, pressure intensifies. Eventually, a star ignites, releasing energy powerful enough to shine for billions of years. What started as slow, almost invisible movement becomes unstoppable energy. Momentum transforms weakness into strength. The same pattern appears in every form of growth. Skills develop through repetition that once felt boring. Knowledge expands through small pieces of understanding that seemed insignificant at first. Confidence grows through actions that originally felt uncomfortable. Momentum does not care how small the beginning was. It only cares whether movement continues. This is the third harsh realization many people never accept. The beginning of progress is always the least rewarding phase. It demands effort while giving almost nothing in return. It asks for discipline while offering no visible proof that anything is changing. Most people abandon their effort right there. They stop pushing before momentum ever has a chance to build. But the universe never promised immediate reward. It promised consistent outcomes for consistent forces. If energy continues to be applied in the same direction, the system eventually responds. Speed increases. Resistance weakens. Movement becomes easier. This is why some people appear unstoppable once they gain traction. From the outside, it looks like sudden success or natural talent. But what is really happening is momentum finally revealing its power. The force built through countless small actions begins multiplying itself. Momentum is dangerous in the best possible way. Once it grows strong enough, it begins carrying effort forward even on difficult days. The system no longer depends entirely on motivation. Progress starts feeding itself. Each result fuels the next action. Each action fuels the next result. This is exactly how objects behave in motion. A moving object resists being stopped. Energy wants to keep flowing in the direction it is already traveling. The faster something moves, the harder it becomes to slow it down. That same principle appears in human behavior. Positive habits strengthen when repeated. Productive routines begin feeling natural. Discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like identity. But momentum has a darker side too. Just as positive movement builds power, negative patterns can build destructive momentum. Delay becomes procrastination. Procrastination becomes avoidance. Avoidance becomes a lifestyle of standing still while time moves forward. Momentum does not judge direction. It simply multiplies whatever motion already exists. This is why the earliest choices matter more than they seem. A small shift in direction can eventually create a completely different destination. A tiny increase in effort repeated daily can grow into unstoppable force. The universe does not require perfection to begin momentum. It only requires motion. Once motion begins, momentum slowly takes over the job of carrying progress forward. And when that happens, the system that once felt impossible to move becomes almost impossible to stop. Stagnation rarely announces itself loudly. It does not arrive with alarms or dramatic warnings. It slips into life quietly, almost politely, until it becomes the default state. Days begin to repeat themselves with almost perfect accuracy. The same routines, the same thoughts, the same patterns. Nothing collapses, nothing explodes, but nothing moves either. And that is the danger. Stagnation disguises itself as stability while slowly draining momentum from everything. The universe does not respect stagnation. In physics, a system that stops moving does not remain perfectly preserved forever. Energy begins to fade. Structures weaken. Without motion, forces that once balanced each other begin to break down. Stars collapse when internal motion can no longer fight gravity. Planetary systems drift when balance disappears. Even massive cosmic structures slowly decay if the forces holding them together lose their movement. Stillness invites deterioration. Human lives are not immune to this pattern. When motion disappears, decline quietly takes its place. Skills that once felt sharp begin to dull. Curiosity shrinks. Confidence fades. Opportunities become smaller and rarer. None of it happens instantly. It happens slowly enough that it almost goes unnoticed. That is what makes stagnation so dangerous. There is a brutal truth hiding inside this process. If nothing in life has changed for years, it is rarely because the world refused to cooperate. It is usually because direction and movement remain the same. The same actions produce the same outcomes. The same routines reinforce the same limits. When the forces applied to a system never change, the results never change either. This is not a punishment from the universe. It is simply the continuation of a pattern. Motion without direction creates chaos. But the absence of motion creates decay. Both lead to the same destination eventually, a life that feels smaller than it once did. Energy that once felt limitless begins to feel scarce. Time moves forward while progress quietly stands still. What makes stagnation especially deceptive is how comfortable it feels in the moment. Predictable routines remove uncertainty. Familiar habits remove pressure. Life becomes easier to manage when nothing new challenges the system. But comfort has a hidden cost. The longer comfort dominates, the harder change becomes. In physics, systems naturally settle into stable states where the least amount of energy is required to maintain them. This is efficient, but it also means that breaking out of that stability requires force. The deeper the system sinks into equilibrium, the stronger the force needed to disrupt it. Human behavior follows the same rule. The longer a pattern continues, the heavier it becomes. Habits solidify. Beliefs strengthen. The idea of doing something different begins to feel unnatural. Even when a person knows change is necessary, inertia built through years of repetition resists every attempt to move in a new direction. This is why stagnation can last decades. Not because change is impossible, but because the energy required to break the pattern keeps growing. Each year adds another layer of inertia. Each repeated day strengthens the old trajectory. There is another harsh realization hidden here. Time does not pause while stagnation continues. The universe keeps moving even when someone chooses not to. Opportunities shift. Environments change. Entire industries transform. Technology evolves. Knowledge expands. Life continues racing forward. A person who stands still in a moving universe is not truly standing still. They are falling behind. The universe never stops applying pressure through change. Systems that adapt survive. Systems that resist motion eventually collapse under forces they refuse to respond to. But stagnation is not permanent unless it is protected. The moment motion returns, the pattern begins to break. Even a small change introduces new forces into the system. Direction begins to shift. Energy begins to flow differently. The first signs of movement might look insignificant. A new skill begins to form. A new idea begins to grow. A new path slowly appears where none existed before. These changes may seem small compared to the weight of years spent standing still, but physics proves that even tiny forces can reshape enormous systems if they continue long enough. Stagnation only survives when motion never arrives to challenge it. Once movement begins, the structure of the old pattern weakens. New momentum begins forming. The same laws that once locked life into repetition begin pushing it toward transformation. The universe never promised that motion would be easy, but it guarantees that stagnation will eventually cost far more than movement ever will. The universe hides one of its most powerful secrets in the smallest forces. Massive explosions and violent cosmic events capture attention, but they are not the only things shaping reality. Quiet, persistent forces often create the greatest changes. A tiny gravitational pull can slowly alter the path of a massive object traveling through space. Light itself, the fastest thing known in the universe, bends when it passes near a strong gravitational field. The force doing the bending is invisible and silent, yet its influence stretches across billions of kilometers. This reveals something surprising about how the universe truly operates. Change does not always require enormous power. It requires consistency. A force that acts for a single moment may cause a brief disturbance, but a force that continues acting day after day becomes something entirely different. It becomes transformative. Over time, it reshapes trajectories, alters systems, and creates outcomes that once seemed impossible. Consider how rivers carve their way through mountains. Water appears soft, almost harmless. A single drop falling on rock does nothing. Even a small stream seems weak compared to the solid mass of stone. But the river never stops flowing. It pushes, erodes, and presses against the same surface over and over again. Years pass. Centuries pass. Eventually, the rock gives way. Deep valleys appear where there was once solid ground. The mountain did not collapse because of a sudden explosion. It changed because a small force refused to stop acting. The universe constantly proves that persistence multiplies power. Gravity itself is a perfect example. Compared to other forces in nature, gravity is incredibly weak. A small magnet can overpower the gravitational pull of the entire Earth when lifting a paperclip. Yet gravity shapes galaxies, bends light, and organizes the structure of the cosmos. It accomplishes this not through intensity but through endless consistency. Human progress follows the same hidden rule. Small actions repeated consistently have the ability to redirect entire lives. A single moment of effort changes very little. But when that effort repeats every day, the system slowly shifts. New abilities develop. New knowledge accumulates. New patterns emerge. At first, the change feels invisible, almost imaginary. But beneath the surface, forces are quietly building. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They underestimate the power of small actions because the results do not appear immediately. One disciplined day feels insignificant. 1 hour of focused effort feels too small to matter. One step toward a new direction feels almost pointless compared to the size of the goal. But the universe never promised immediate impact. It promised cumulative impact. Every force leaves a mark. Every action changes the balance slightly. Every repeated effort applies pressure to the system. The change may be microscopic at first, but microscopic changes accumulate. Over time, they compound into something far greater than their individual part. This is how complex systems evolve. Small adjustments in orbit can shift the position of planets over millions of years. Tiny variations in energy can transform clouds of gas into blazing stars. The universe does not rush transformation. It builds it slowly until the change becomes undeniable. The same principle applies to personal growth, learning, and progress. A mind exposed to new ideas every day slowly reshapes itself. A skill practiced repeatedly sharpens beyond recognition. A habit repeated long enough becomes automatic. None of these transformations begin dramatically. They begin quietly, almost invisibly. That is why most people fail to trust the process. They judge progress by what they can immediately see rather than by the forces that are steadily acting beneath the surface. But physics does not lie. Persistent force always alters the system eventually. There is also a deeper realization hidden in this pattern. Enormous change rarely begins with enormous action. It begins with the decision to apply small force repeatedly without interruption. The consistency itself becomes the power. Over time, the system starts responding differently. What once required effort becomes easier. What once felt slow begins accelerating. Momentum begins amplifying each small action. Eventually, the accumulation reaches a tipping point where the results suddenly appear dramatic. From the outside, it looks like sudden transformation. But in reality, it was the product of thousands of quiet moments where a small force refused to stop acting. The universe rewards persistence in ways that dramatic bursts of energy never achieve. Explosive effort fades quickly. Consistent pressure reshapes reality. A tiny shift applied every day can redirect an entire lifetime. The force may seem small in the moment, but time turns that small force into something powerful enough to bend the future itself. The laws that govern motion are brutally indifferent. They do not reward good intentions. They do not respond to promises, plans, or potential. They respond only to force, direction, and movement. This is what makes them so powerful and so uncomfortable at the same time. Because once this truth is understood, many of the excuses people rely on suddenly collapse. The universe does not care how intelligent someone is if no action follows that intelligence. It does not care how ambitious a plan sounds if it never turns into motion. Ideas alone carry no momentum. Dreams alone create no force. Without movement, they remain weightless thoughts drifting nowhere. This realization can feel harsh, but it is also strangely freeing, because it means progress is not reserved for a special group of people. The laws of motion apply equally to everything that exists. They do not discriminate. They do not favor talent over effort or luck over persistence. They simply respond to the forces applied to a system. Movement creates results. Stillness preserves the current state. Many people believe success belongs only to those with extraordinary abilities or rare opportunities. But physics tells a different story. Systems change when consistent force is applied over time. Direction determines where that change leads. That is the entire equation. There is another uncomfortable truth hidden here. Potential means absolutely nothing until it turns into motion. A powerful engine sitting idle produces no movement. A rocket full of fuel that never ignites remains trapped on the ground. All the capability in the world becomes irrelevant if no force is applied. The same pattern appears in human behavior constantly. Brilliant ideas fade because no one acts on them. Talented individuals remain stuck because their abilities never translate into consistent effort. Meanwhile, others with fewer advantages move steadily forward simply because they refuse to remain still. The universe does not measure what someone could do. It measures what actually happens. This is why excuses collapse under the laws of motion. Every explanation about why progress has not happened eventually leads back to the same question: was force applied or not? If movement did not occur, the system remains unchanged. No amount of reasoning alters that outcome. Some people resist this idea because it removes the comfort of blame. It becomes impossible to point endlessly at circumstances, timing, or other people. The laws of motion reveal a simpler truth. Progress requires applied force. Without it, nothing shifts. But this same rule also removes the illusion of limitations that feel permanent. If motion begins, the system begins to change. Even small actions alter the direction of energy. Momentum slowly builds. What once seemed impossible starts becoming realistic. The universe does not demand perfection before movement starts. It only demands that movement happens at all. Another hidden strength in this principle is that motion compounds over time. A single action may appear insignificant, but repeated actions accumulate into force strong enough to reshape an entire trajectory. Once the system begins responding, progress becomes easier to sustain. This is why some individuals appear unstoppable after a certain point. Their success is not the result of one extraordinary moment, it is the result of continuous movement that gradually built unstoppable momentum. The laws of motion did not suddenly start working for them. Those laws were always working. The difference is that force was finally applied long enough for the system to change. Understanding this truth creates a powerful shift in perspective. Instead of focusing endlessly on circumstances or waiting for perfect conditions, attention shifts toward movement itself. Direction can always be adjusted. Strategies can evolve. But motion must exist first. Without it, everything remains hypothetical. The universe never promised fairness or comfort. What it offers instead is consistency. Apply force long enough and the system responds. Remain still long enough and the system remains unchanged. Those rules are not negotiable. They are simply the way motion works across the entire cosmos. And once they are understood, it becomes impossible to ignore the most important question of all. Is movement actually happening, or is everything still waiting to begin? Speed fascinates people. Fast cars, fast technology, fast progress. Movement that happens quickly feels impressive. It creates the illusion of power and control, but the universe reveals a deeper truth that often goes unnoticed. Speed alone means very little if the direction is wrong. An object traveling through space can move at incredible velocity, yet still end up lost in the emptiness of the cosmos if its path is slightly off course. A comet racing across the solar system follows a precise trajectory determined by gravity and motion. If that path shifts even slightly, the destination changes completely. The object might never return, drifting endlessly into darkness despite its tremendous speed. Direction determines destiny. The universe does not reward movement that lacks alignment. Energy applied in the wrong direction simply carries the system further away from its intended destination. No matter how fast something moves, if the path is incorrect, the final outcome will still be failure. This is a difficult truth to accept because activity often feels like progress. Being busy feels productive. Constant motion creates the illusion of achievement. Days filled with tasks, responsibilities, and effort appear meaningful on the surface, but activity without direction is simply motion without purpose. In physics, direction is described as a vector. A vector contains two essential pieces of information: magnitude and direction. Magnitude describes how powerful the movement is. Direction determines where that movement leads. Without both elements working together, motion loses its meaning. A powerful force applied in the wrong direction produces the wrong result faster. Human effort follows the same principle. Someone can work harder than anyone else, push themselves constantly, and still end up stuck in the same place if the underlying direction never changes. Energy is being used, but it is not being aimed correctly. This is why many people feel exhausted without seeing real progress. Their effort is real. Their work is real. But their direction is unclear. Motion becomes scattered across too many paths, too many goals, too many distractions. The system moves constantly but never travels far. The universe values alignment more than speed. A slow-moving object traveling in the correct direction will eventually reach its destination. A fast-moving object on the wrong path will never arrive, no matter how powerful its motion becomes. Over time, correct direction quietly defeats reckless speed. This is where clarity becomes more powerful than effort. When direction is clear, every small action contributes to the same trajectory. Energy begins stacking instead of scattering. Each step reinforces the previous one. Momentum grows in a straight line instead of dispersing into chaos. Without direction, momentum becomes unpredictable. A system moving without guidance can accelerate toward outcomes it never intended to create. Just as a comet can be pulled into deep space by the wrong gravitational influence, a person can be dragged into habits, environments, and patterns that slowly pull them further away from what truly matters. Correction is one of the most powerful actions any system can make. In space navigation, even massive spacecraft rely on tiny adjustments to stay on course. A slight change in direction early in the journey can completely transform the final destination. The correction itself may be small, but the long-term impact becomes enormous. Human lives operate the same way. A small shift in thinking can redirect years of effort. A slight adjustment in priorities can change the entire trajectory of the future. These corrections may not feel dramatic in the moment, but over time they create massive divergence between one path and another. The universe does not demand constant speed. It demands alignment between force and direction. Sometimes slowing down long enough to correct the path is more valuable than continuing to move quickly. A pause for recalibration can prevent years of wasted energy. Once direction becomes clear, even moderate effort begins producing meaningful results. This is the quiet advantage of those who understand motion deeply. They focus less on how fast they are moving and more on where that movement is taking them. Their energy flows toward a defined target instead of scattering across endless distractions. Eventually, the difference becomes obvious. One path leads somewhere real, while the other burns energy without ever arriving anywhere meaningful. In a universe governed by motion, direction quietly decides everything. Speed may impress observers, but direction decides the outcome. Every system in the universe eventually faces a moment where forces collide and something must change. Motion cannot continue forever without consequences. Energy builds, pressure increases, paths intersect, and eventually the system reaches a critical point. At that point, one small shift can completely transform everything that follows. Physics calls these moments tipping points. They are the thresholds where gradual change suddenly becomes dramatic transformation. For a long time, forces may build quietly without visible results. Pressure accumulates beneath the surface while everything appears stable. Then, almost instantly, the system breaks into a new state. Stars are born this way. For millions of years, clouds of gas drift slowly through space. Gravity pulls particles together little by little. The changes are so slow that they seem meaningless. But the pressure keeps building. The temperature keeps rising. Eventually, the system reaches a critical threshold where nuclear fusion ignites. In a single moment, a quiet cloud transforms into a blazing star capable of lighting entire regions of the galaxy. The transformation looks sudden, but it was actually the result of countless invisible forces building over time. Human progress follows the same pattern more often than people realize. Long periods of effort can feel completely unrewarded. Work continues, actions repeat, discipline is applied, yet nothing dramatic appears to change. It feels as though the system is ignoring the effort entirely. Doubt begins to grow, frustration builds. The temptation to stop becomes stronger with every passing day. But beneath the surface, forces are still accumulating. Knowledge grows even when it feels slow. Skills improve even when the difference seems small. Habits strengthen even when the progress is difficult to measure. Every action adds another layer of pressure to the system. Eventually, something reaches its threshold. A skill suddenly becomes natural. An opportunity appears that once seemed impossible. A new level of confidence emerges from nowhere. From the outside, it looks like sudden success or overnight transformation. But that moment was created by hundreds or thousands of small actions that quietly pushed the system closer to its tipping point. The universe rewards persistence with these moments of acceleration. But there is another harsh truth hidden here. Tipping points work in both directions. Just as consistent effort can push a system toward powerful breakthroughs, consistent neglect can push it toward collapse. Systems weaken slowly until a critical failure occurs. A star burns steadily for billions of years. But when its fuel finally runs out, the collapse can be catastrophic. Structures that appear stable for decades can fail suddenly once the internal pressure becomes too great. The warning signs often exist long before the event, but they remain invisible to those who are not paying attention. Human lives experience these negative tipping points as well. Years of ignoring growth can suddenly lead to missed opportunities that cannot be recovered. Long periods of avoidance can suddenly create consequences that feel overwhelming. The collapse appears sudden, but the forces that caused it were building quietly the entire time. This is why consistent motion matters so much. Every day adds pressure in one direction or another. Each action pushes the system slightly closer to a breakthrough or slightly closer to stagnation. The difference between transformation and decline often lies in forces that seem too small to notice in the moment. The universe never stops accumulating these forces. This means every choice matters more than it appears. Even the smallest movement contributes to the overall direction of the system. Momentum builds gradually until the tipping point finally arrives. When that moment comes, everything accelerates. The system shifts into a new state where the old limitations no longer apply. What once required extreme effort suddenly becomes natural. What once seemed unreachable becomes reality. The transformation feels sudden, but it was actually the result of long preparation hidden beneath the surface. The universe constantly moves toward these moments of change. Pressure builds. Forces accumulate. Energy seeks release. Eventually something gives way and a new phase begins. The only real question is which direction the pressure has been building all along. Because when the tipping point finally arrives, the path forward will already have been decided by the forces that were quietly shaping it the entire time. The universe never pauses. Every second, every atom, every system is moving, changing, shaping the next moment. And right now, the same hidden laws that control galaxies are quietly shaping your life. They don't wait for permission. They don't ask if you are ready. They simply act. Momentum builds whether you take action or stay still. Inertia strengthens whether you fight it or give in. Direction matters whether you plan or drift. The universe does not negotiate with excuses. It only responds to movement. This is your final, unavoidable truth. You cannot remain neutral. Standing still is not safe. Doing nothing is not harmless. Every day spent waiting adds weight to inertia, strengthens stagnation, and pushes your life further from the possibilities you claim to want. Every day spent moving, even a tiny step forward, begins bending the system in your favor, building momentum, creating force that can no longer be stopped. The universe rewards motion. It punishes stillness. So here is the challenge. Stop overthinking. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop hoping motivation will magically appear. Apply force now. Move. Start small if you must, but start. Align your direction. Choose one action today that pushes your life forward. One step is enough to begin momentum. One choice is enough to break inertia. One decision repeated is enough to bend your trajectory towards something extraordinary. Every law that governs stars, planets, and galaxies applies to you. The only difference is whether you decide to act. Every moment is a tipping point. Every force counts. Every motion matters. The universe is moving. The question is simple. Are you moving with it, or are you letting it pass you by? Your life is your system. Your choices are the forces. The only thing left to do is apply motion and let the laws that control the cosmos start working in your favor. Move or stay stuck forever. The choice is yours.